Hey y'all, Daniel from Ironman LLC here, and today we're going to be talking about MOTS-c. And before we actually get into this video, if you're coming from my Instagram page at I am not a doctor too, I want everyone to know literally everything I post is rage bait content to drive you here, and ideally to our website. What we really do is regenerative medicine therapies, peptides, TRT, hair loss treatments, what have you. So if you're coming from there, first of all, thank you for watching my stuff, and I'm glad to have you here. Second of all, I'm not your typical peptide bro who just does a one size fits all and says Retta, MOTS-c, CJC, and ipamorelin. That is the lifelong stack, and that is what you need to perform optimally. If anyone you watch is saying that on the internet, they're doing a gross disservice to your health. I have a twin brother. He's actually my business partner. If me and him run the same cycle of a certain compound, it's going to impact our bodies differently. One of us might actually develop insulin resistance due to the timing of the peptide or just internal biological factors that will make our reactions to these compounds different. So, before I actually go into the compound and the research, the literature, which is where I derive most of the value and what I formulated my business on, I want you to understand that this is not medical advice. This is purely for educational purposes only. Consult your actual primary care physician for guidance, for medical help, and evaluation. I'm not a doctor. Let's make that clear right now. So, MOTS-c. This peptide has taken over the internet completely, and everyone describes it totally wrong. I'm sure you've heard of this peptide labeled as the energy peptide, right? This will make you energized. You can run 1,000 miles. You'll be able to close deals 50 times faster. You feel like the man. Not exactly, but there's parts of it that relate to energy. So let's actually pull up some literature here that I made for y'all. Um, excuse me. So this peptide is not coded by your DNA like many endogenously produced peptides in our system are. What does that mean? Well, peptides are naturally occurring amino acid chains that are produced endogenously within our own endocrine systems. That by extension, it doesn't necessarily mean they're hormonal. Insulin's a peptide, right? For diabetes. MOTS-c is a peptide. What else? Thousands of peptides. I don't even know if there's a million, but peptides are produced endogenously. They are organically produced endogenously. And also, one thing I want to clarify, whenever you ask these Miami biohacker bros of, yeah, peptides are natural, man. I take them all the time. Our body produces them. Your body produces natural endogenous peptides. The peptides that you see right here, oh, pointed at the wrong one. This vial right here, that is chemically synthesized in a lab to be an identical compound to mimic what the peptide that is being produced in your body does. Does that make sense? It is a synthetic peptide to mimic a naturally occurring peptide. So people say peptides are natural. They are, the ones that we produce. This one, however, that's made in a lab. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's made in a lab and it's not organic. So throw that BS out the window of peptides are organic. The ones in these vials, absolutely not. They're compounded in a lab. And for a lot of you, you're buying research chemicals online. Who the hell knows what's in them? But I digress. But a completely separate genome that lives inside your cells, most people don't even know this actually exists. It's been hiding in plain sight for decades because everyone assumed mitochondria only do one thing. What do you learn in fifth grade science? They make energy, right? Turns out they also communicate, they talk, they send out signals, hormones, basically, that go and tell the rest of your body what is actually going inside the cell. So this is one of them. It's called MOTS-c. This is just one of the byproducts of your mitochondria. Depending on who you ask, if you ask me, I think it's fascinating, but it's either the most interesting discovery in the mitochondrial biology in the last decade, and it's going to change longevity medicine for centuries, long after I'm gone. And it's just the next peptide of the month for a lot of people. It's just, oh, hop on MOTS-c, cycle it 2 months. You're going to get some injection redness and swelling, but it makes you energized. Depending on who you ask, you could get very different answers, but I'm going to tell you what's actually found in the literature. So let's actually go through what's actually real and studied, not from what you see on Reels, because I spend a lot of time on Reels too. So MOTS-c, what does it actually stand for? The peptides always have very funny names. Let me drink some kombucha. Stands for mitochondrial open reading frame of the, what is this? 12S RNA type C. So it was actually discovered in 2015. Very new peptide. And it was published in Cell Metabolism by a group out of USC. So that's where it really got mainstream, or let's just say discovered. So this was actually a landmark paper because it helped establish basically this new category of signaling molecule mitochondrial derived peptides. They call them MDPs. So the mechanism in regular English is MOTS-c gets released from our skeletal muscle, travels through the blood, and acts on target tissue within our own body, mainly muscle and fat. I'm going to get into why that's important in a second. Where it messes with something called the folate cycle. Not sure if anyone here has heard of that, but it sounds a little bit irrelevant. But if we disrupt that cycle, it causes a buildup of a certain molecule called AICAR, AICAR. It's a direct activator of AMPK. So people say it activates AMPK, but in reality, it disrupts a cycle that causes a buildup of a molecule called AICAR. That is the direct activator of AMPK. So it's flipping multiple switches to activate AMPK. So if you know anything about metabolism, and if you don't, I'm about to educate you, AMPK is the master energy sensing switch in all of the cells in your body, every single one. It's the same pathway, if you've heard of metformin, another compound, that works through. And it's also the same pathway your body activates when you're in an energy deficit, like during exercise. That's why it picked up the nickname exercise in a vial. Not because it replicates training. Like if you inject it, you're not going to be, your heart rate's not going to go to zone 3 and you're going to burn a ton of calories. It's because it's turning on some of the internal switches that training does. So it's basically signaling your body that it's doing exercise. Does that make sense? So here's where it gets very interesting because the peptides you hear about have zero human data. BPC, TB500. There's never been a clinical funded study or even some trials, but this one actually does. Not a clinical trial, but I'm skeptical about that because if you look at the funding of some of these trials, especially for the testosterone and hormone optimization side, it gets a little fishy. But in a controlled physiological study, it's everyone that I think this one should be cited anytime someone brings up MOTS-c. It was published by Nature's Communication in 2021. Researchers actually took healthy young guys like myself, very handsome, and they had them do a bout of stationary bike exercises. Excuse me, kombucha's kicking my butt. Ugh. So after they did the bike exercises, they pulled both blood and muscle biopsies of the before and after exercise. The result, the skeletal level of MOTS-c actually went up 12 times. 12 times after a single workout. This is not repeated exposure. This is not over the duration of the week. This is one workout. One workout. 11.9 to be exact. But the circulating blood, which basically helps with your cardiovascular system, went up around 1.6 times, roughly 125 picograms per milliliter, up to 190. Very substantial if you know anything about the cardiovascular system and how relevant that is to MOTS-c. The real finding under the exercise and the medic label that we hear it is that your body's already making more of this when you train hard. It's actually making this compound consistently, but it's not some exotic external compound doing something foreign to your physiology. That's not like TRT, right? It's just a signal your muscle already produces, and current research is asking, what if we push this a little bit further, right? So the same paper also ran aging arm study in mice, 22-month-old mice to be exact, very young, which is roughly equivalent to, I guess not, to a 65, 70-year-old human. Interesting. Okay, they gave them MOTS-c 3 times a week, and these aged mice more than doubled their treadmill running capacity and actually, outperformed untreated middle-aged mice. So that's a real result. That's not a marketing ploy. That's a peer-reviewed finding in one of the most respected journals that exists to date. That is the literature that literally exists. I don't know why people aren't talking about this, but and this really matters. It is mice, but we don't have the human trial showing the same efficacy and the same reversal of physical decline yet. But we do have exercise induction data in humans. We do have aging, the mice studies. They're two different claims, but I don't want to conflate them because a lot of the marketing already does that. But you can see where this is going, right? So if we could try to mimic that in a human trial, I don't know if the results will be as substantial, but I do believe it will be a significant needle mover in that direction. So here's a wrinkle in the data that basically never makes it into that sales copy, which is pretty relevant. There's a human study that looked at MOTS-c levels in older men, and it found something counter what you'd expect. Plasma MOTS-c goes down with age. That part fits the story for sure. But muscle MOTS-c actually goes up with age, weirdly enough. And it's tied to a shift in muscle fiber type, more slow twitch fibers as you get older. And in that older cohort, the men with actually higher MOTS-c had better muscle quality and maturity. What does that mean? Well, it means more strength relative to the size of the muscle. So the muscle bellies were probably smaller, but the strength relative to that size was a larger output. So the story isn't as clean as people say MOTS-c is online. You either replace it or you exogenously inject more, you're fixed. It's not necessarily true. The regulation of this peptide changes with age in ways that, excuse me, so sorry. Woo! That aren't fully mapped out yet. But I'd rather tell you that than the data is cleaner than it is, right? Beyond the muscle metabolism story, there's a growing body of preclinical work applying MOTS-c to specific disease models worth knowing because it tells you how broad the pathway actually is. Because in a heart failure mouse model, MOTS-c actually reduced cardiac dysfunction. Very good. And remodeling after induced pressure overload. And the mechanism again ran through the AMPK activation with reduced inflammation. By extension, that's a good thing, right? You always want to reduce inflammation in whatever facet. Some instances you don't, but I'll get into that in a different video. In a lung injury model too, the radiation-induced lung damage, which is a real clinical problem in cancer patients getting chest radiation. So MOTS-c actually reduced oxidative stress and tissue damage through a pathway called NRF2, which is one of the body's main antioxidant defense systems, if you know that. And more on the exploratory end, this is not proven, but there's early research in ovarian cancer cells showing that MOTS-c actually inhibited cell proliferation and invasion into vitro tied to a specific protein interaction. I want to flag that that's an early stage mechanistic work. Excuse me. It's not proven. It's more in theory, like cell culture and correlation data. It's not a therapeutic claim by any means. This is just research, as all these articles are stating. But it shows the reach of what this molecule seems to actually touch on. So let's talk about the side that no one wants to lead with. I like to always look at the data, the promising, the actual, and the negatives. I think that's a very objective way of talking about these compounds and how they're utilized in daily life, in daily use. So MOTS-c it's not approved for FDA, through the FDA for human consumption, as a lot of these compounds are. There is no completed human clinical trial establishing a safety profile, which if you know anything about FDA compliance, that there has to be some sort of data over a long period of time establishing safety data in order for pharma to slap a label on it and sell it. That doesn't exist right now. I'm assuming there's going to be some sort of funding by some billionaire, who knows. But the closest thing to this is actually another peptide analog called, I believe, CB4211. I'll go and do my research too, but they're developed by a company called Cobar, and they did a complete early phase trial, and it was tolerated short term, but persistent injection site reactions were super common, which happens in MOTS-c as well. So that was the only real side effect that was reported. But everything else out there, completely anecdotal. So that's why it's kind of dangerous whenever you're buying from a research site or not vetting the actual compound or doing some sort of blood panel before to judge histamine reactions when you're taking these kind of compounds. But people buying, the research use, professional use files, I went through what's actually being reported, and I want to separate the source quality here. because most of it's coming from the peptides that sell the research grade, which is a conflict of interest if you're reading about safety guidelines, right? But there's only one non-commercial source that actually comments on this. It's actually USADA, the anti-doping agency. If you know me about my background, jiu-jitsu guy, boxing guy, work very closely with professional MMA fighters, have a lot of connections to the UFC, or not the UFC, but professional promotions here, do some networking with local promotions here. And I personally work with fighters to just help with their recovery. I don't want to go against USADA or any sort of anti-doping agency. This is all educational. I don't support any of that. Should never cheat in any sort of sport. But MOTS-c is actually prohibited in competitive sports. Isn't that interesting, right? And that language is worth hearing directly because people who are buying MOTS-c online, they're seeing the typical side effects, increased heart rate, palpitations, injection site reactions. And the bottom line is blunt. It's currently unknown under what conditions that it's safe because there's no clinical trials. But I would be concerned if there was a lot more reported deaths than adverse reactions, which there's been none from what I've read. But the nausea, the headaches, the blood sugar fluctuations shows up consistently across all the reports. And its mild anti-inflammatory effects are definitely worth noting. But since the USADA does disprove of this compound, I do think that does prove its efficacy. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Does that mean that they know something that we don't? Does this mean that this literature is pointing to a green light for this to be FDA approved or to be commercialized? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too. But since MOTS-c does work through AMPK as well as metformin, which I mentioned earlier, it's actually an awesome compound. So do actually other drugs, even something simple as, guess what, your daily aspirin. It does have some AMPK related activity, not the exact same, but similar pathways. So if you stack these things, it's not inherently dangerous, but it's a variable that's never been discussed. So if you're experimenting with MOTS-c, do so under a doctor. Try not to stack it with aspirin or any sort of thing that coincides with an AMPK activation. Just do this responsibly. But the mechanism, it's well published. We know what it does with a lot of peptides. We know at the base level what they're supposed to do, but what we're going to find out in the next 6 months, 5 years, what is the long-term effects and what are the actual secondary effects through long-term use. So that's where I come in. I take these compounds a lot for educational purposes, and that's just the actual state of the research. If no one's going to publish a clinical trial, that leaves us, the consumer, to do it to ourselves. So I do want to share this graph of MOTS-c. And sorry, I kind of ran through a ton of topics here. Let's see. Let's hope that, oh, hold on. Zoom is not letting me share my screen here. I'll just edit this after. But I'm going to attach a PDF that I curated of the actual AMPK activation pathway and how it actually links to MOTS-c levels. Or excuse me, how MOTS-c is introduced into the body and how that directly impacts AMPK. So I'm going to put that in the description as well. And then I'm going to link all of the sources I used to pull the data from. But basically, in a nutshell, MOTS-c is not the energy peptide. It tells your body that it is in a state of exercise, and it basically improves insulin sensitivity through the AMPK pathway. So if you pin it, you're not going to get the effects of like caffeine or some sort of stimulant that makes you feel alert, that raises the heart rate directly like that. It's more of like a sustained biological boost, mimicking what your body does during exercise. So I hope that this video has been educational. We do pharmaceutical grade compounding pharmacy peptide optimization. Totally blocked my own website. That's terrible. IronMendLLC.com. I got to get used to the Zoom here. My goodness. IronMendLLC.com. We do asynchronous peptide batch ordering, kit ordering, and fully compliant. We basically do an intake form. We set you up with a doctor. You only pay if you get approved. So you don't just buy it and it gets approved. No, we have to check your medical history. Don't lie on that, obviously, because you could be playing with your health too. But we're fully compliant. We only approve compounds that you're truly a fit for and that do not interfere with any current medications you're taking, any sort of precancerous risks. And peptides are still new. So we're doing everything we can above board and legal. So I know a lot of people are scared of the prices, but would you rather inject a $50 peptide than get rushed to the ER and spend $2,000 in medical bills? Or would you rather just do it the safe way and actually improve your longevity? So I'll leave that question to you. Comment what you thought of the video, and we're gonna blast a ton of these videos out in the next week, month. And please keep liking my Instagram at I am not a doctor and at Ironman Dallas. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.